Hey friends, Lucian here with the Bullish Bears team. Wanted to make this video on the rising window pattern, otherwise known as gaps. So I'm going to go to Investopedia.com, kind of read to you a definition of gaps. It's a very handy resource. If you ever want to learn about anything in the stock market, just use Investopedia, type it in, and they have very simplified definitions of things. So I'll read you a definition and then give you several real world examples, because I'm all about showing real world examples because that's really the most important thing when trading. Gaps are areas on a chart where the price of a stock or other financial instrument moves sharply up or down with little or no trading in between. As a result, the assets chart shows a gap in the normal price action. The enterprising trader can interpret it and exploit these gaps for profit. And then it talks about, going into more in depth on gaps, right? So again, if you want to read more about all the definitions, just use Investopedia.com. So let's go look at some charts. Now, there's a saying in the industry with gaps that all gaps must be filled, right? Now it's just a matter of when. So again, nothing's ever 100%, right? I'm not going to say every gap will always 100% always be filled. It's kind of like a saying, but it happens more times than not. But if those gaps take time to fill, right? So you might see them and the stock might be broaching, but it doesn't mean it's going to fill right away. Those gaps are very important support and resistance areas that traders pay really, really close attention to. So as a stock broaches a gap, you really want to pay attention to that and see what price action is happening, like what's happening around those gaps, right? So I'm going to show you several examples on what to look for. So right here is this chart right here is the SPX S&P. You're going to see here it shows rising window, again, otherwise known as gap. And you're going to see that space in between there, right? So that's a gap up, right? So now many times price will go back and end up filling those gaps. If it's going upwards, if there's a gap up, many times price will come down and fill that gap. If there's a gap down, many times price will go up and fill that gap. These are very, very important areas to pay attention to. So if you draw a line right in between, you'll see that gap is like right at the top of this candle and right at the base of that wick right there. There's a gap. So price gapped up, and what do you see? This one happened to, fill very quickly, right? So this one went up, fell back down, and filled that gap. The gap, again, the top of the gap and the bottom of the gap are extremely important support and resistance areas that traders pay attention to. You can see over here, here's a falling gap, right? This area right here. Eventually, who knows when? It could be months, weeks, years down the road. Eventually, price is going to want to try to gravitate and go back and fill that gap. Now, if or when that happens, that's all about obviously following the charts, right? So this is, again, what a gap up looks like, or a rising wedge. So that's how it looks like. I'm going to show you several examples. You're going to see these things all over. I can show you just several of gaps. You can see a gap, kind of one right here, right in this area here. Gaps just happen all of the time. Very, very, very important support and resistance areas to pay attention to. Super important. Let's take a look at another one. Let's look at Apple, right? Here's Apple, had a gap up, right? So you can see here, if I draw right here a line and a line right here, gap up or rising window. I'm just using both definitions just because depending, the Japanese candlestick books, Candlestick Course, really awesome book that we highly recommend. They call them rising windows, right? Most people are more familiar with it called a gap. So right here, here's a gap up. At some point, that gap might want to be filled. So price might fall down and fill that gap. Then it's either going to continue downwards, trade sideways, or go up, right? There's no predicting what a stock's going to do really ever. You just have to use charts and patterns to your advantage. But again, you got to, just chart it, right? So support and resistance, very important areas. Traders pay super close attention to those gaps. Very, very important to keep an eye on. I'm going to show you a few more examples. Again, they're kind of self-explanatory. It's kind of simple seeing gaps. You'll start to notice them like everywhere when you look at stock charts. They're like everywhere. Let's look over here. You can see this one is Facebook. Where is that one that I have? Rising window right here. Price is moving up. See right here, you can see a gap up. See that space in between, right? There's a space in between here. Price went up, came back down. Look at this. It went just touched right into the gap. No coincidence, right? Kind of got in there, bounced out of it, went back up, came back down. Look here, broached it again, right in the middle of the gap. Didn't fill it, right? Went back up, came back down, one, and then boom, now it filled it there. And you can see some kind of indecision here, went back up, and you see the retests? Many retest. There's kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then boom, price went back up again, traded above that gap, came back down again. So you can extend these lines out, and you'll start to see those are support and resistance lines in the future as well. So this gap's very, very important to pay attention to. Let's look at Netflix, NFLX. Where is that one? Rising window, right here. Right? Let's see here. Gapped up, right? Big gap. So price went up, had a big gap up, came back down. Look what happened. Price retested the top of that gap once, twice, 3 times. Went, look, halfway down, didn't fill it. Now it's gone back up. Who knows if or when it's going to happen, but traders are going to be very, very well aware of this major gap. So eventually, some point down the road, that gap might want to fill. It could, again, take days, weeks, months, or a year. But as you can see how price tests those areas? Very, very important to pay attention to for support and resistance. We'll look at 2 more here. Let's look at AT&T. Rising window right over here. So you can see window right there. See this window here? Price down here, gaps up, comes back down. What happens over here? Touches and hits this top of the gap, right? Goes into it, doesn't fill it. Comes back up, goes around over here, tests it here once, twice, 3 times, goes down. Now it filled. This gap is now filled. Finds a base. Now what happens? Price starts to reverse, and guess what? The bottom of that gap is now resistance. So you can see kind of this area here. It's kind of broaching it, gets into the gap here, goes up and fills it here. Now it's going to be like, what's going to happen? You can see right here, it kind of went up, came back down into the gap before it went back up again. So gapped up, came back down, filled it, comes back up, hits the resistance, goes in there, fills it, and then it's going to decide, is it going to continue upwards, come back down into the gap, or fail? What did it do? A little bit of a fake out, and then it went up. So important. And then you can just, again, drill these into the future, and it's just, again, all parts of support and resistance that traders pay super close attention to. I can't stress enough how very important gaps are on really all time frames. You know, it's just very important traders pay attention to them. Last but not least, Twitter. You can see here, big kind of gap up right here. It's kind of right in this area there. In the gap, right? So a big gap up, you know, came back down, retested it here, and then now it's been kind of going up and trading sideways. At some point, it may want to go back and retest it. Again, this is going to be critical support, these levels right here. And then if price falls below it and fills the gap, it's going to become critical resistance areas. This gap is going to be very, very important for critical support and resistance areas, right? That's how gaps work.